She's off doing odd jobs for the military somewhere. Nothing worth discussing. My mother said that to 140 people at a ceremony named after my father. I was sitting 12 feet away. I heard every word. I want you to understand what that sentence cost her to say. Not emotionally, I mean structurally. Because the woman who said it had been living in a house for 15 years that I paid for. Had a surgery 2 years ago that I covered without being asked. Had a son in college whose tuition I wired from a field location whose name I'm not authorized to say in a public forum. Nothing worth discussing. I pressed my thumb against the dog tag under my collar. Tactical breathing. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4. The same sequence I'd been running on myself since I was 19 years old, and the world required me to be more composed than the situation deserved. I reached into my left breast pocket. The envelope had been there for 14 months. Through a field exercise in August. Through Christmas leave I spent in a hotel because my mother mentioned without explicitly saying that the house might be full. Through 2 countries and a dirt road in Kandahar where I held a man's spine neutral for 47 minutes on the chance it would make the difference between walking and not walking. I had been waiting for the right room. 140 people. A podium. A plaque with my father's name on it. This was the right room. I stood up. She always stood up. In 38 years, Linda Walker had never let a room get away from her without standing up. I had watched her do it in church pews, in school auditoriums, in hospital waiting rooms. She stood up the way people stand up when they believe their presence is the most important thing in any room they enter. Reyna. Her voice was controlled, warning wrapped in civility, the voice she used when she wanted to remind me that scenes were for people without dignity. This is not the time. I looked at her for 3 full seconds. 15 years ago, I said. You told me the same thing at Dad's funeral. The room didn't move. You were right then, I said. You're not right now. I opened the envelope. Before I tell you what was inside it, before I tell you who wrote the letter that I'd carried in my left breast pocket through 2 combat deployments without opening, saving it for a day I wasn't sure would ever come, I need to tell you about a road in Kandahar province in 2018. And a man I pulled out of a burning vehicle at 3:47 inches the afternoon who didn't know my name. My father died on a Tuesday. Sergeant First Class Reyna Castillo, 82nd Airborne, killed by an IED outside Kandahar City on a Tuesday in March when I was 14 years old and sitting in second period algebra class that had nothing to do with anything that mattered. The Army sent a notification officer. 2 of them, actually a captain and a chaplain, which I later learned meant the situation was serious enough for God to be present. They came to the school, not the house, because my mother had listed the school as the first emergency contact. I've thought about that detail many times, that she listed the school first, that when the Army needed to tell someone her husband was dead, she wanted that someone to be reached at a place that wasn't home. I walked out of that school with 2 strangers in uniform and understood, in the specific way that 14-year-olds understand things that are too large for them, that my life had just been divided into 2 parts. Before. And everything after. My mother grieved in a way that consumed all available oxygen in every room she entered. Not dramatically, I want to be accurate here, because she is not a villain in the way that word usually gets used. She grieved quietly, thoroughly, and with a dedication that left very little room for anyone who wasn't also her grief. My brother Marco, 3 years old at the time, was too young to remind her of what she'd lost. He was new. He was the future. I was 14 and I had my father's cheekbones. His way of going still before saying something important. His habit of reading the room before entering it. Every time my mother looked at me, she saw the thing she was trying to stop seeing. She didn't hate me for it. I want to be clear about that too. She was a woman trapped in a grief response that had calcified over 15 years into something she couldn't distinguish from personality anymore. She looked at me and felt pain. And the human brain, when it feels pain, learns to look away from the thing causing it. She looked away from me for 15 years. Meanwhile, I cooked dinner from the age of 14. I managed the household budget from 15 because my mother couldn't look at numbers without crying and Marco was too young to hold a calculator. I applied for ROTC scholarships at 16 without telling anyone, not to escape, to continue. To be the next Castillo who served. To take what my father had started and carry it forward in the only way I knew how. The morning I left for basic training at 18, my mother was awake. I know because I saw the light under her bedroom door. She didn't come out. I pulled the door shut quietly. Got on the bus. Didn't look back. The army doesn't ask if anyone came to say goodbye. The army asks, "Are you ready?" I had been ready since I was 14 years old, standing in a school hallway with two uniformed strangers, while algebra continued on the other side of a door. "Yes," I said. I'd been training for that answer for 4 years. 15 years. I want to put that number into a different kind of shape because I think numbers in the abstract don't land the same way as numbers in the specific. 15 years is 180 monthly transfers. 180 times I opened a banking app on whatever device the army had issued, or I'd managed to acquire, navigated to the transfer screen, and moved money from an account I'd earned in places I can't fully describe to an account in San Antonio, Texas, where my mother and my brother lived in the house the army paid the mortgage on after my father died, and that the army stipend eventually stopped covering entirely. I picked up where the stipend stopped, not because anyone asked me to, because I ran the numbers in 2010, during my second deployment, on a satellite phone during a communications window, and understood that if I didn't, the house would go into foreclosure within 18 months. Marco was 13. My mother was working part-time because full-time anything felt like too much. The math was simple. Reyna covers it or it doesn't get covered. I covered it. The total, which I calculated during a sleepless watch rotation in 2022, with nothing but a flashlight and a spreadsheet I'd maintained since 2010 on a password-protected app that I've since transferred to 3 different phones. 14,300美元, give or take. Mortgage payments, utility overages in the bad months, Marco's junior college tuition because he wanted to be a graphic designer and my mother said she believed in him. 1 car repair that was actually 2 car repairs because the first mechanic my mother chose wasn't licensed. A medical procedure my mother needed in 2019 that her insurance didn't fully cover and that she mentioned to me in a text message at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, which was the medical equivalent of a bill arriving in the mail already past due. 14,300美元. I didn't tell anyone the number. Not my CO. Not my unit. Not the therapist the army required me to see after my second deployment, who asked all the right questions about my family situation and received the answers I had learned to give, which were calibrated to be technically accurate and emotionally uninformative. I kept the number in a spreadsheet, and I kept the spreadsheet locked, and I kept the lock in my head, and I kept my head forward, because that is what you do when you have been trained to move through situations that would stop other people. Cold. You move. Marco didn't know about the money. I want to be fair to him. He was 3 when my father died. He grew up in a house where things were provided without explanation, which is the experience of every child in a house where the person providing doesn't announce themselves. He wore my father's dog tags. I noticed that the first time I came home on leave in 2015, the second dog tag, the one my mother was supposed to keep, the one that was supposed to stay in the family as a record, was around my 21-year-old brother's neck like jewelry. I didn't say anything. I ran my thumb along the one around my own neck, the one I'd asked the notification officer if I could keep. The one that had been with me through every deployment, every field exercise, every night I lay awake in a bunk somewhere doing the math on how much was left in the account and how much the month still needed. I didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't require a conversation I wasn't ready to have yet. I just filed it, the way you file things that matter. 6 years ago. I want to tell you this part precisely because I think precision is the only honest way to tell it. Not to make it larger than it was. Not to make myself larger than I was. Because what I did that afternoon was not heroic in the way the word gets used. It was mechanical. It was trained reflex. It was the body doing what the body had been taught to do before the mind had time to run cost-benefit analysis. We were on a route clearance mission. 4 vehicles. Route Tampa, Southern Sector. The 3rd vehicle hit a pressure plate IED approximately 400 meters from our turnaround point. I was in the 4th vehicle. I was out before it fully stopped. Standard trauma response protocol. Establish security, assess casualties, treat life-threatening injuries in order of severity. You don't think it. You run the protocol. The protocol is the thinking pre-made, field-tested, reliable in ways that in-the-moment cognition is not. The driver of Vehicle 3 was dead. I knew that in the first 4 seconds. The passenger was Sergeant First Class David Dominguez, 46 years old, 22 years of service. His right side had taken most of the blast. The vehicle was on fire. Not fully the engine compartment, spreading. We had maybe 90 seconds before the fuel line went. He was conscious. That was the first thing. He was also not moving. That was the second thing. He looked at me through the window and said one sentence. I can't feel my legs. Spinal precaution protocol. Which meant I couldn't drag him. Couldn't pull him by the arms. Had to immobilize and extract in a way that kept his spinal column neutral, which in a burning vehicle with 90 seconds on the clock and a fuel line that didn't care about protocol was not a simple calculation. I did it anyway. Not because I was brave. Because I am a combat medic, and he was my patient, and combat medics do not leave their patients in burning vehicles regardless of what the fuel line is doing. I got him out. 14 seconds before the fuel line went. I know this because I counted, the way you count everything in situations where counting is the only control you have left. He lost consciousness on the way to the aid station. I rode with him. Held his cervical spine in neutral with both hands for 47 minutes on a dirt road that had no interest in being smooth. He was medevacs to Bagram, then Landstuhl, then Walter Reed. I wrote one line in my incident report. Assisted in extraction of SFC Dominguez from disabled vehicle. Maintained spinal precautions during transport to aid station. Assisted. I flew back to San Antonio on leave 3 weeks later. My mother met me at the door, told me Marco had gotten a freelance design contract, and asked if I wanted chicken or pasta for dinner. I said pasta. I didn't tell her about Dominguez. I already knew exactly how that conversation would go. It arrived 14 months after Kandahar. A letter, handwritten, forwarded through my unit's administrative office because it had been sent to Fort Bragg, and I had since rotated to Fort Sam Houston, and mail forwarding in the Army is a system that technically functions and practically operates on faith and luck. The return address was Corpus Christi, Texas. The name was David Dominguez. I recognized it. Looked at it for a long time in the parking lot of the administrative building. Then I put it in my left breast pocket and drove to the commissary because I needed coffee and milk and the kind of crackers that are 90% salt, and that I had been eating since my first deployment as a specific kind of comfort food. That doesn't require any emotional processing. I didn't open it. Not that day. Not the next week. Not during the subsequent 14 months of routine that was anything but. I carried it through a field exercise in August. Through a change of command ceremony in October. Through Christmas leave that I spent at a hotel in San Antonio because my mother had mentioned, without explicitly saying, that the house would be full with Marco's girlfriend's family and there might not be quite enough room. I put the letter in my left breast pocket every morning the same way I put on my dog tags. Not because I forgot it was there, because I wasn't ready. There are things you carry until the right room exists for them. The right room arrived in a VFW hall in San Antonio on a Tuesday morning in May, when my mother stood up and reminded 140 people who I was not. The event was called a dedication ceremony. VFW Post 76, San Antonio. Third Tuesday in May, Memorial Day week. The post had renovated their training room, new flooring, new lighting, a proper entrance with a lockable door, instead of the old folding partition that had divided the main hall for 30 years. They wanted to name it after my father. Reyna Castillo Room. Sergeant First Class. 82nd Airborne. Killed in action. March 2005. Someone at the post had looked up his service record and reached out to the family. My mother said yes. She said yes. And she coordinated the invitation list. And she sent the notices. And she arranged for a caterer to bring sandwiches for after. And she did all of this without mentioning it to me, until 6 days before the event, when she texted me a date and an address and nothing else. I drove down from Fort Sam Houston the morning of. Arrived at 9:45. Parked. Sat in my car for 8 minutes doing the same tactical breathing I'd been doing since I was 19 years old. And something in my environment required me to be more composed than I naturally was. Then I walked in. My mother was near the front, talking to the post commander. She saw me enter. Gave the specific nod she gives when she acknowledges my presence without welcoming it. The nod that means you're here. Good. Now stay in your lane. Marco was beside her. Dog tags visible above his collar. He saw me and smiled the way he smiles genuinely, without any of the complicated architecture that had grown up between his mother and his sister. Marco was the only person in my family I didn't have to decode. Ray. He hugged me. Solid. Real. You made it. I made it, I said. The ceremony started at 10. The post commander spoke about my father. Read from his service record 2 tours. Air assault qualified, multiple commendations, the kind of record that sounds like a list of accomplishments. until you remember that each item on the list was a situation where the outcome wasn't guaranteed. I sat in the fourth row. My mother and Marco were in the first. Halfway through the post commander's remarks, my mother leaned over and said something to Marco. He nodded. She turned slightly in her seat, not toward me, but in my general direction and in the particular acoustics of a room with hard floors and a low ceiling. I heard her say, "She's going to make this about herself." The woman sitting next to me heard it too. I knew because she went still in the way. People go still when they have absorbed something they didn't expect to hear. I pressed my thumb against the dog tag under my shirt. Tactical breathing. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4. The post commander finished his remarks. He invited family members to say a few words. My mother stood. She spoke for 4 minutes about my father. It was a good speech, I want to be honest about that. She remembered him accurately, with the specific details that only someone who had loved someone for a long time would know. The way he took his coffee. The sound he made when he laughed at something he genuinely found funny versus something he was being polite about. The fact that he always overpacked for any trip longer than overnight because he had a deep institutional distrust of anywhere that wasn't home. It was a good speech. At no point did she mention that she had a daughter who had served in the same branch for 15 years. At no point did she mention that the contribution her family had made to this post's operations fund the check she had written 6 months ago that the post commander had mentioned in his opening remarks as a generous gift from the Castillo family had come from a wire transfer I made in November from a field location in a country whose name I wasn't authorized to say in a public forum. At no point did she mention me at all. She sat down. The post commander looked toward the fourth row. Would anyone else like to say a few words? I stood up. My mother's shoulders went rigid. I walked to the podium. I reached into my left breast pocket. I set the envelope on the podium with both hands. Before we name this room after my father, I said, I think you should know who's been paying the bills to keep this building standing. The envelope was not sealed. I had opened it 3 nights before, in my quarters at Fort Sam Houston, sitting on the edge of my bunk at 2,300 hours with the overhead light on and my hands steadier than they had any right to be. I had read it twice. Then I had folded it back along its original creases, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope back in my left breast pocket, and gone to sleep. I read it to the room. Not all of it. 11 sentences. The ones that mattered. Captain Castillo, I don't know if this letter will reach you. I sent it to Fort Bragg because that's the only address I could find. If you're not there anymore, I hope whoever reads this knows to pass it along. My name is David Dominguez. You pulled me out of a burning vehicle en route Tampa on the 14th of October 2018. I was in and out of consciousness. I didn't know your name. I only remembered one thing, your hands. The way they held my head still the entire ride to the aid station. 47 minutes on a dirt road. You didn't let go once. I spent 4 months at Walter Reed. I have feeling in my legs. I walk with a cane now, but I walk. The doctors said the spinal precautions during transport made the difference between that and a wheelchair. I've been trying to find you for 3 years. I finally got your name from the incident report through a FOIA request. I am a carpenter now in Corpus Christi. I build things. I think about you every time I use my hands. I don't know what your life is like or what your family is like. I don't know if you have people who see you clearly. I hope you do. But if you don't, if there is any room in the world where people are not seeing you the way you deserve to be seen, I want you to know that one person on this earth will spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what you Ari. You are the reason I am standing. David Dominguez, SFC, Ret. I folded the letter. 140 people in a VFW hall in San Antonio, Texas, were completely silent. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the letter. Dad ran into a burning building for a child he'd never met, I said. I ran into a burning vehicle for a soldier I didn't know. 15 years ago I started sending money home every month because the math said if I didn't, this family would lose the house. I never mentioned it. I didn't think I needed to. I reached into my pocket. The dog tag. I set it on the podium. Not the letter. The dog tag. I'm not asking for anything, I said. I'm just done being invisible in a room named after my father. I stepped back from the podium. I didn't leave. I walked back to the 4th row and I sat down. And I stayed. Staying is harder than leaving. I want to be precise about this because I think there is a narrative about people in situations like mine that defaults to the dramatic exit. The woman who walks out and doesn't look back. The door closing. The freedom. And that narrative is real. I have lived it. I left for the army at 18 and I have never fully returned to anything that felt like the house I grew up in. But staying in that chair, in that fourth row, while 140 people processed what they had just heard that required something different, something more specific. The same controlled stillness I use when I am monitoring a patient whose vitals are unstable, and I need my hands to be steady precisely because the situation is not. My mother did not turn around. Marco did, once, briefly. His face had the expression of someone recalculating something large and finding that the numbers don't balance the way he thought they did. He looked at me for 3 seconds, and then looked away, and I saw him reach up and touch the dog tags around his neck with 2 fingers. The post commander cleared his throat, said something about a short break before the dedication. People stood, moved. The specific controlled movement of people who are trying to have private conversations while in a semi-public space. I watched them and did not move and did not speak and did not make anything easy by disappearing. A woman I didn't recognize sat down in the empty seat next to me. 70s, silver hair. The particular posture of someone who had served or had spent decades around people who did. My husband was 82nd, she said. 2 tours in Vietnam. Yes, ma'am. He never talked about what he carried either. She paused. Until someone else talked about it for him. Same way. I looked at her. The letter, she said. That's the kind of testimony you can't argue with. I nodded once. She patted my hand once and stood and walked away. My mother came to me 20 minutes later. Not to the fourth row. I had moved to the side of the room by then, near the window, where the morning light came through the kind of thin curtains VFW halls always seem to have. She came and stood beside me, and for a long time neither of us said anything. Then she said, I didn't know about the money. I looked at her. Not all of it, she said. I knew some. I didn't know it was. I didn't know the total. $143,000, I said. Give or take. She was quiet. I didn't know about the soldier, she said. No. Why didn't you? Because I knew what you'd do with it, I said. You'd nod and say, and ask Marco what he wanted for dinner. She flinched. The honest thing about watching your mother flinch at a sentence you've said is that it is not satisfying in the way people imagine it will be. It is just accurate. And accuracy, when it finally arrives in a room that has been running on a different version of reality for 15 years, feels less like triumph and more like the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a heavy thing for a very long time and has finally set it down. Not because they are done with the weight, because they are done carrying it alone. I'm going to stop the automatic transfers, I said. Starting next month. That's not punishment. That's the math. She didn't argue. I don't know if I expected her to. I think I expected something, the particular energy she brings to rooms when she is defending her version of events. But she stood there beside me, and she looked like what she was. A woman who had grieved so long it had become her architecture, and was now watching that architecture be examined for the first time by someone who had been inside it. He would have been proud of you, she said. I looked at the dog tag on the podium, the one I had left there. I know, I said. That was the whole conversation. My therapist, Colonel Osei, has an office at Fort Sam Houston, with a window that faces the parade ground. On mornings when ceremonies are scheduled, you can hear the band from inside. She says she has learned to work around it. I believe her. She asked me, 3 weeks after the VFW ceremony, what I was feeling. I told her I was feeling the specific relief of a mission that had been running so long it had stopped feeling like a mission, and started feeling like the baseline state of reality, finally, irrevocably, complete. She wrote that down. What changed? She said. I thought about it. Someone said it out loud. I said. Not me. Dominguez. Someone who had no reason to and no obligation to, and who spent 3 years trying to find me just to say, I know what you did. I see it. It was real. She nodded. And before that? Before the letter? Before the letter I knew what I had done. But knowing and being witnessed are different things. Yes, she said. They are. I think I had been waiting for my mother to witness it, I said. And I think somewhere around year 12 I accepted that she wasn't going to. But some part of me kept running the protocol. Keep the transfers going. Keep showing up. Keep being the person who does the thing that needs doing regardless of whether anyone is watching. Why? I thought about my father. The way the notification officers looked when they came to the school. The way the chaplain held the door open. The way my father had run into a burning house for a child whose name he never learned. Because Castillos don't leave people in burning buildings, I said. even when the people in the burning buildings are the ones who didn't reach for us first. She was quiet for a moment. Do you think that's sustainable? She said. That standard? No, I said. I think it burns you up eventually. I think my father understood that and accepted it. I think I've been accepting it too. And now? I looked at the parade ground through the window. Now I think I'm allowed to apply that standard selectively, I said. I think I'm allowed to be the person who runs into the building for the people who deserve it, and to stop maintaining a building for people who are fine letting someone else pay the heat. She didn't say whether that was healthy or not. I've stopped needing her to. Here is what I want to say to you directly. There is a particular experience that military families know, and that doesn't have good language around it. The experience of the one who serves, while the family benefits. The stipend. The housing allowance. The death benefit that becomes, over time, the floor that a family stands on while one person is somewhere else maintaining it. I am not saying every family does this. I am saying some do. I am saying it is easier than people think for a family to build a life on a foundation they do not examine, because the foundation is reliable and the reliable thing is the thing you stop noticing. You stop noticing it until it stops. And then you understand, for the first time, that the foundation was a person. The $143,000 was not why I stopped. I stopped because I read a letter from a man in Corpus Christi who had spent 3 years and a FOIA request trying to find the name of the person who held his head still on a dirt road for 47 minutes. Who wanted me to know that one person on this earth was going to spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what I was? You can keep a lot going with the absence of that. You cannot keep going, once you've had it, on the absence of it. The transfers stopped on June 1st. My mother has a part-time job she's been doing for 3 years that she never mentioned to me because as long as the transfers were coming in, there was no reason to. I found out from Marco. He told me the same way he told me about the dog tags in the simple information-sharing way of someone who has no idea he's handing over something significant. She'll be fine. The math works. I ran it. It always came back to the math. The Reyna Castillo room was dedicated at 11:30 a.m. Small brass plaque. His name, his rank, his dates. The post commander said a few words. Someone played taps. The way taps always lands. Regardless of how many times you've heard it, which in my case is a number I have stopped counting because counting it is its own kind of weight. I stood in the back. Marco found me afterward. He'd taken the dog tags off, held them in his hand. These should be yours, he said. I looked at them. The metal worn smooth in the specific way of something that has been handled by people who needed to feel connected to something solid. Keep them, I said. He'd want you to have them. But maybe now you know a little more about what they mean. He nodded. The particular nod of a 27-year-old man beginning to understand something he should have understood earlier, and processing the specific shame of that timeline. I didn't know, he said. About the money. About any of it. I know, I said. That's not on you. I want to help, he said. Going forward. I want to... Marco. I put my hand on his arm. Start by knowing. That's enough for now. He looked like he wanted to say more. I let him decide not to. We stood there for a moment in the parking lot of the VFW, in the May heat that San Antonio does with a specific and relentless sincerity, and I thought about my father running into a burning house on a Tuesday night. I thought about a dirt road in Kandahar. 47 minutes. Hands that didn't let go. I thought about a letter carried in a breast pocket through 2 combat deployments, waiting for the right room. The room had existed for a long time. I had just needed to build enough of myself to stand in it. A week later, I received a call from the VFW's national organization. The post commander had submitted a formal nomination for a community service recognition based on Dominguez's testimony and my service record. The process would take several months. There was no guarantee. I thanked the coordinator. She asked if I had any questions. I had one. Is there a designation for service that was specifically not announced? I said. Not because it was classified. Because the person doing it didn't see the point in announcing it. A pause. What do you mean? I mean, is there a way to recognize a thing that was done without audience? Done because it needed doing, not because anyone was watching? Another pause. Longer. That's kind of what all of these recognitions are for, she said. The whole point is to name the thing after the fact, because the person doing it was busy doing it. I sat with that for a while. Okay, I said. Then I have no questions. I called Dominguez that afternoon. Corpus Christi. He picked up on the second ring. Captain Castillo, he said. Like he'd been waiting. How'd you know it was me? 3 years looking for your name, he said. I memorized your number the day I got it. I looked out the window of my quarters. Parade ground. The band was rehearsing something I couldn't make out what. Just the specific sound of many people practicing the same thing until it becomes singular. Thank you for the letter, I said. Thank you for the 47 minutes, he said. We talked for 22 minutes. About his work in Corpus Christi. About the cane he'd traded for a walking stick he'd made himself from mesquite wood because he was a carpenter and he didn't see the point of buying something he could build. About his daughter, 11 years old, who wanted to be a doctor. Tell her combat medicine is an option, I said. He laughed. Real laugh. The kind that means something. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a while. Then I opened my laptop, navigated to the banking app, confirmed that the automatic transfer scheduled for June 1st had been cancelled, and closed the screen. I pulled the folded piece of paper from my wallet. My father's grocery list. 2001. His handwriting in blue pen, slightly hurried. The particular handwriting of someone who was always moving toward the next thing. Milk. Bread. Coffee the good kind. Flowers for the table. He always bought flowers for the table. I held that piece of paper for a long time. Then I put it back in my wallet. In the front pocket where I keep the things I don't want to have to search for. Outside, the band had found its rhythm. I listened. All characters, situations, and events in this story are fictional, created entirely for the purposes of dramatic storytelling, entertainment, and emotional reflection. Any resemblance to real persons, institutions, or events is coincidental. This story explores themes of military service, family dynamics, invisible sacrifice, and the difference between being needed and being seen.